April 22nd, 1950, 3:17 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon. The corner of Lenox Avenue and 133rd Street in Harlem. Mayme Johnson walked out of her boutique, Mayme's Fine Fashions, carrying 2 garment bags and her leather purse. She was 42 years old, elegant in a cream-colored suit and pearl earrings. Every inch the successful businesswoman she'd worked 15 years to become. The spring sunshine was warm, the sidewalks crowded with Saturday shoppers, jazz music drifting from the record store 2 doors down. She locked the boutique's door behind her, checked her watch, she had a hair appointment at 4 p.m., and started walking toward her parked Cadillac half a block away. That's when the van pulled up beside her. A gray Ford panel van with no windows in the back, no company markings on the sides. It rolled to a stop directly next to Mayme, the side door already sliding open before the vehicle had fully halted. 3 men jumped out. White men in work clothes, moving fast, their faces showing a mix of determination and badly concealed nervousness. The closest one, later identified as Carl Henderson, a 34-year-old mechanic from Brooklyn, grabbed for Mayme's arm. "Get in the van," he hissed. "Don't scream or wheel." He never finished the sentence because Mayme Johnson did something that shocked him completely. She didn't scream. She didn't try to run. She dropped her garment bags, planted her feet, and looked him directly in the eyes. "You have exactly 3 seconds to let go of my arm," she said, her voice loud and clear, carrying across the crowded sidewalk. 1, 2. Henderson hesitated, confused by this reaction. Victims were supposed to be frightened. This woman sounded angry. That 3-second hesitation was all the time needed for the street to respond. A voice from the sidewalk. "That's Mrs. Johnson. Someone's grabbing Mrs. Johnson." Another voice, sharper. "Get away from her." And then, within 5 seconds of the initial grab, something extraordinary happened. People started moving toward the van. Not running, purposefully walking. Store owners emerged from their shops. A postal worker dropped his bag and started across the street. A woman with 2 small children stepped forward instead of backing away. By the time Mayme reached 3 in her countdown, over 20 people were converging on the scene. Henderson looked around, saw the approaching crowd, and made the calculation that would save his life. This wasn't going to work. "Get back in," he shouted to his 2 companions, already scrambling toward the van's open door. But one of them, Michael Dougherty, a 29-year-old Klan member from Queens, was too slow. As he turned to retreat, someone from the crowd grabbed his jacket. Then someone else grabbed his other arm. Within seconds, Dougherty was surrounded by 7 people, none of them letting go. The van driver, whose name was never positively identified, made his own decision. He hit the gas while Henderson was still halfway inside, leaving Dougherty behind, leaving Mayme Johnson standing unharmed on the sidewalk, leaving their entire plan in ruins. The van disappeared around the corner onto 134th Street at 3:19 p.m., less than 2 minutes after the attempted kidnapping had begun. Michael Dougherty, now held by over a dozen Harlem residents, started screaming that he hadn't done anything wrong, that this was all a misunderstanding, that someone should call the police. Someone did call the police. But they also called someone else, someone far more consequential. Within 8 minutes, word reached Bumpy Johnson that 3 white men had just tried to kidnap his wife in broad daylight on Lenox Avenue. And what happened in the hours that followed would demonstrate exactly why attempting to abduct a Harlem crime boss's wife in the middle of his own territory was possibly the most catastrophically stupid decision anyone could make. But the real story isn't just about what Bumpy Johnson did. It's about what happened in those first 2 minutes, how an entire neighborhood responded instantly to protect one woman, and what that response revealed about power, community, and the invisible networks that made Harlem more than just a collection of streets. To understand why 20 people immediately moved to protect Mayme Johnson, you need to understand who she was in Harlem in 1950. Mamie Hatcher had married Bumpy Johnson in 1948, but she'd been part of Harlem's social fabric since the late 1930s. She wasn't some naive woman who'd accidentally fallen for a gangster. She knew exactly who Bumpy was when she married him, knew the risks and complications that came with being his wife. But Mayme had built her own identity, separate from her husband's criminal enterprise. Mayme's Fine Fashions had opened in 1946 on Lenox Avenue, catering to Harlem's growing black middle class. The boutique sold dresses, suits, hats, and accessories, quality clothing that black women couldn't buy in most Manhattan department stores, which either didn't serve black customers at all or relegated them to inferior merchandise and separate dressing rooms. By 1950, the boutique employed 6 people full-time and generated approximately $45,000 in annual revenue, roughly $550,000 in today's dollars. It was a legitimate, successful business built on Mayme's taste, business acumen, and reputation for fair dealing. But more than business success, Mayme had built social capital. She attended the Abyssinian Baptist Church regularly. She donated to Harlem charities. She hired local women who needed work, trained them in sales and tailoring, gave them references when they moved on to other opportunities. She extended credit to customers going through hard times, never charging interest, just asking that they pay when they could. The community knew her as Mrs. Johnson, always respectful, always with the title. Not Mayme the gangster's wife, but Mrs. Johnson the businesswoman, the neighbor, the woman who'd held a fundraiser to buy new musical instruments for the local school, who'd organized clothing drives for families displaced by fires, who'd personally paid for a widow's son's funeral when the woman couldn't afford it. This was the woman those 3 Klan members tried to kidnap. The Ku Klux Klan's presence in New York City in 1950 was experiencing a post-war resurgence. After declining during World War II, when fighting overseas fascism made domestic racism less socially acceptable, Klan membership had started climbing again. By 1950, an estimated 2,000 Klan members operated across the 5 boroughs, concentrated in working-class white neighborhoods in Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island. Their northern strategy was different from the violent terrorism of southern chapters. Instead of lynchings and church bombings, Northern Klan members focused on intimidation, economic pressure, and strategic targeting of prominent black figures. The plan to kidnap Mayme Johnson had been developed over 6 weeks by a Klan cell in Brooklyn led by Gerald Morrison, a 47-year-old union organizer who believed that attacking Bumpy Johnson directly was impossible. The man was too well protected, too connected, too dangerous. But his wife? She seemed vulnerable. She ran a small business with minimal security. She had regular, predictable patterns. Opened her shop at 10 a.m., closed at 3 p.m. on Saturdays. Morrison's plan was straightforward. Grab Mayme, take her to a safe house in Queens, demand that Bumpy Johnson cease his business partnerships with Italian crime families and withdraw from certain territories. Use her as leverage to force one of Harlem's most powerful figures to back down. It was a plan built on fundamental misunderstandings about Harlem, about community bonds, and about Mayme Johnson herself. 3:19 p.m. The van had fled. Michael Dougherty was surrounded by over a dozen people on Lenox Avenue. Clara Washington, a 38-year-old elementary school teacher who'd been shopping at the fruit stand across the street, was the first to reach Mayme. "Mrs. Johnson, are you hurt?" "I'm fine," Mayme replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline. "They didn't get me. But we need to hold that one," she pointed at Dougherty, "until police arrive." "Police are coming," said Marcus Bennett, the owner of the record store, who was standing in his doorway with the phone still in his hand. "But I also called Mr. Gordon. Illinois Gordon, Bumpy's top lieutenant. The call that would set everything else in motion." Meanwhile, Dougherty was panicking. "I didn't do anything. Those other guys, they forced me to come. I didn't want to be here." "Then why were you trying to pull me into a van?" Mayme asked calmly. It was supposed to be." Dougherty was spiraling, his story changing with each sentence, his face going red then pale. "A postal worker named Jerome Miller, who'd been 3 doors down when the attempt happened, had taken control of Doherty's arms. "You're not going anywhere until the police get here. And you're going to want the police to get here before Mr. Johnson does." It was a statement loaded with implication. Everyone on the street understood the subtext: policemen arrest and legal consequences. Bumpy Johnson meant something far worse. At 3:22 p.m., 5 minutes after the attempted kidnapping, 2 NYPD patrol officers arrived. Patrolman Richard Murphy and his partner, Officer James Wade, both from the 28th Precinct, which covered this part of Harlem. Murphy took one look at the scene: a white man being held by a crowd of black residents, a well-dressed black woman standing calmly in the center of it all, and immediately understood this was going to be complicated. "What happened here?" Murphy asked. At least 5 people started talking at once. Murphy held up his hand. "One at a time." "Ma'am," he looked at Mayme, "you appear to be the victim. Please explain." Mayme laid out the facts clearly, precisely, like someone who'd thought about this moment before. "At approximately 3:17 p.m., I exited my business establishment at 541 Lenox Avenue. A gray Ford panel van pulled alongside me. 3 white men exited the vehicle and attempted to force me into it. This man," she pointed at Doherty, "was one of them. The other 2 fled in the van when bystanders intervened. I'm prepared to make a formal statement and press charges for attempted kidnapping." Her use of precise language: business establishment, exited, formal statement, immediately established her as credible and composed. This wasn't a hysterical victim. This was a businesswoman reporting a crime. Murphy turned to Doherty. "What's your name?" "Michael Doherty." "But I didn't. This isn't what it looks like." "It looks like attempted kidnapping," Murphy interrupted. "You got a different explanation?" Doherty went silent. Any explanation would implicate him further. Marcus Bennett spoke up. "Officer, I witnessed the entire incident from my doorway. Everything Mrs. Johnson said is accurate. I can provide a written statement." "So can I," Clara Washington added. "And me," said Jerome Miller. Within 2 minutes, Officer Murphy had 7 witnesses willing to provide statements. This wasn't some ambiguous street dispute that would come down to he said, she said. This was a clear crime with multiple credible witnesses and a suspect in custody. "Michael Doherty, you're under arrest for attempted kidnapping," Murphy said, pulling out his handcuffs. As Murphy cuffed Doherty, a car pulled up. Not a police vehicle. A black Chrysler New Yorker. Illinois Gordon stepped out, followed by 2 other men from Bumpy's organization. Gordon walked directly to Mayme. "Mrs. Johnson, are you all right?" "I'm fine, Illinois." These people, she gestured to the crowd still standing nearby, made sure of that. Gordon nodded, then turned to Officer Murphy. "Officer, what's the situation?" "We have a suspect in custody for attempted kidnapping. Mrs. Johnson will need to come to the station to make a formal statement." "I'll drive her," Gordon said. "That won't be necessary." "I wasn't asking," Gordon interrupted quietly. "Mrs. Johnson will make her statement. She'll cooperate fully. But she's going to the station in our vehicle, not a police car. You understand why." Murphy did understand. If Mayme Johnson was seen being driven to the police station in a patrol car, rumors would spread. People would assume she'd been arrested, or was cooperating against her husband, or a dozen other damaging narratives. Arriving in her own vehicle maintained her dignity and made clear she was the victim, not suspect. "Fine," Murphy agreed. "But we need her at the 28th Precinct within the hour." Gordon turned to Mayme. "Where's Bumpy?" "Downtown Manhattan, meeting with Costello's people about the Bronx situation. Someone already called him. He's coming." Mayme's face showed the first hint of real concern. Not about the kidnappers, but about what her husband might do when he arrived. 4:05 p.m. The 28th Precinct Station House on West 123rd Street. Michael Doherty sat in an interrogation room across from Detective Paul Harrison, a 15-year veteran who specialized in serious crimes. Harrison had been briefed on the situation: attempted kidnapping of a prominent Harlem resident who also happened to be married to one of the city's most powerful criminals. "Let's start simple," Harrison said. Who were the other two men? Doherty stayed silent. Look, kid, you're already caught. You're facing kidnapping charges. That's 25 years minimum. The other guys got away. They're free, and you're here. You really want to protect them? Doherty's resolve cracked almost immediately. Carl Henderson and I don't know the driver's name. We called him Dutch. Where were you taking Mrs. Johnson? A house in Queens. Astoria. I don't know the exact address. Henderson set it up. Why? What was the purpose? Doherty hesitated. This was the crucial moment. If he admitted it was a Klan operation, he'd implicate the entire organization. If he lied, he'd face additional charges for obstruction. We were trying to send a message to her husband about his business dealings. What message? That he needed to stop working with Italians, to give up some territory, to remember his place. Harrison leaned back in his chair. Remember his place. That's an interesting phrase. What do you mean by that? I mean that. Doherty couldn't finish the sentence without making the racial component explicit. You mean that a black gangster shouldn't be working with white crime families, Harrison said flatly. That he should stay in his own neighborhood, deal with his own people, and not rise above a certain level of power. It's not like that. Then what's it like? Doherty went silent again. Harrison consulted his notes. You're from Queens. Carl Henderson is from Brooklyn, according to our records. We got his name from the van's partial plate that witnesses recorded. Neither of you have any business in Harlem. Neither of you have any legitimate grievance against Bumpy Johnson or his wife. So who sent you? Nobody sent us. Don't lie to me, Harrison interrupted. This operation required planning. Surveillance to know Mrs. Johnson's schedule. A vehicle. A safe house. Multiple people coordinating. Someone organized this. Who? If you're watching this because you're fascinated by how real criminal investigations worked, not the TV version, but the actual interrogations, the paper trails, the moment when plans fall apart, make sure you subscribe. This is history that rarely gets told in detail. Doherty looked at the interrogation room's two-way mirror, then back at Harrison. I want a lawyer. Smart choice, Harrison said. But before the lawyer gets here, let me explain your situation. You're in custody for attempting to kidnap Mayme Johnson. The evidence is overwhelming. Multiple witnesses, your own presence at the scene. You're going to prison. The only question is for how long and whether you go alone or with company. He leaned forward. Here's what I'm offering. Cooperate fully. Give us names and locations. Testify against whoever organized this, and I'll recommend reduced charges. You might do 5 years instead of 25. You might even get protective custody. Or you can stay silent, protect people who abandoned you on a Harlem street, and spend the next quarter century in Sing Sing. Doherty's hands were shaking. If I talk, the Klan, Harrison repeated. So this was an organized Klan operation. Doherty realized he'd just confirmed what Harrison had suspected. We're done talking until I have a lawyer, Doherty said. Fine. Harrison stood up. But you should know, Bumpy Johnson is in this building right now. He's downstairs with his wife while she gives her statement. And he knows you try to kidnap her. Your lawyer might keep you from incriminating yourself legally, but there's another court you should be worried about. And they don't wait for appeals. 4:23 p.m. The 28th Precinct's waiting area. Bumpy Johnson sat next to his wife while she gave her formal statement to his stenographer. He hadn't said a word since arriving, just sat with his hand on Mayme's, his face showing nothing. But everyone in that police station, from the desk sergeant to the detective upstairs interrogating Doherty, could feel the tension. Bumpy Johnson was known for two things: strategic intelligence and absolute loyalty to family. Someone had just tried to kidnap his wife. The question wasn't whether there would be consequences. The question was what form those consequences would take. Illinois, Gordon approached quietly. The other two got away. The van was found abandoned in the Bronx. No prints, no evidence. Henderson and the driver are gone. Bumpy nodded once. They'll surface. You want me to start looking? No, Bumpy said quietly. Let the police do their job for now. Doherty will talk. He's scared and alone. He'll give up names. Then we'll know who we're dealing with." It was a surprisingly patient response from a man whose wife had just been attacked. Mayme noticed it too. "You're being very calm," she observed. "I'm being strategic," Bumpy corrected. "If I go to war right now, I don't know who I'm fighting. Could be 3 idiots acting alone. Could be a larger Klan cell. Could be someone using the Klan as cover for something else entirely. I need information before I respond." Lieutenant Thomas Maxwell, the senior officer on duty, approached their table. "Mr. Johnson, Mrs. Johnson, I need to speak with you both." They followed Maxwell to a small office. He closed the door and sat down heavily. "Here's the situation," Maxwell began. "We have Doherty in custody. He's lawyered up now, but he already admitted enough to confirm this was a Klan operation targeting Mrs. Johnson specifically to pressure you. We'll charge him with attempted kidnapping, conspiracy, and probably a few other things. He's looking at serious time." "What about the other 2? Bumpy asked. "We're looking. We have a partial plate on the van, an ID on Carl Henderson from our files. He's a known Klan associate. We'll find them." "How long?" Maxwell met Bumpy's eyes. "I can't give you a timeline. Could be days, could be weeks. But here's what I need from you. Let us handle this legally. No street justice. No disappearances. We do this by the book. We put these men in prison where they belong. You do it your way. You create problems for everyone, including Harlem." "You think I don't know that?" Bumpy replied. "I think you're a smart man who's very angry right now. And smart men sometimes make bad decisions when it's personal." Mayme spoke up. "Lieutenant, my husband isn't going to do anything reckless. But you need to understand, the Klan tried to kidnap me in broad daylight on Lenox Avenue. That's not just a crime against me. It's an attack on the entire community's sense of security. People need to know there are consequences. And there will be," Maxwell assured her. "Legal consequences. Public consequences. This will be in every newspaper tomorrow. The Klan will be humiliated that their operation failed in 2 minutes because an entire neighborhood responded. That's a powerful consequence." It was a smart appeal. Maxwell was acknowledging that consequences mattered while steering them toward legal rather than criminal retaliation. Bumpy was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I want protection for my wife. Not just police patrols, actual protection, until everyone involved is in custody." "Agreed," Maxwell said immediately. "We'll have a patrol car on your block 24/7. Mrs. Johnson gets an escort when she goes to work. And I want to know immediately when you find Henderson and the driver." Maxwell hesitated. "Why?" "Because I deserve to know when the men who try to kidnap my wife are in custody. That's reasonable, isn't it?" It was reasonable. And both men knew that Bumpy was also calculating what he might do with that information. "I'll keep you informed," Maxwell agreed carefully. Over the next 72 hours, the kidnapping attempt became front-page news. The New York Amsterdam News ran the headline, "Klan Kidnapping Attempt Foiled by Harlem Community Response." The article detailed how over 20 residents had immediately converged to protect Mayme Johnson, how the attempt had failed within 2 minutes, how one suspect was in custody while 2 others were being sought. The New York Times covered it on page 11. 3 men arrested in attempted kidnapping, Klan links investigated. More conservative in language, but still emphasizing the organized hate group aspect. The Daily News gave it sensational treatment. Mobster's wife targeted by KKK, plot crumbles on Harlem Street. All 3 newspapers mentioned that Mayme Johnson was a successful businesswoman, that she'd remained calm during the attack, that the community response had been immediate and overwhelming. Carl Henderson was arrested on April 25th, 3 days after the attempt, at his brother's house in New Jersey. He'd fled across state lines, which added federal kidnapping charges to his state charges. The mysterious driver, identified only as Dutch, was never found. Speculation suggested he'd left New York entirely, possibly fled to the South where Klan networks could hide him. But the real consequence wasn't the arrests. It was what happened to the Klan's New York operation. The organization's leader, Gerald Morrison, who'd planned the operation, was visited by Frank Costello's representatives on April 27th. The message was simple. The Italian families did business with Bumpy Johnson. Attacking his wife disrupted that business. The Klan needed to cease all operations in New York immediately, or there would be consequences that transcended law enforcement. Morrison, facing pressure from both the legal system and organized crime, dissolved his Brooklyn cell within 2 weeks. Over half the Klan's estimated 2,000 New York members quit the organization within 6 months. Turns out that when membership means attracting both FBI attention and mob retaliation, the appeal diminishes significantly. But perhaps the most significant outcome was what happened in Harlem itself. The story of the failed kidnapping became legend. Not an exaggerated legend. The facts were already dramatic enough. But a teaching story about community protection, about instant response, about the power of collective action. Store owners on Lenox Avenue talked about it for years. The day Mrs. Johnson was attacked, and 20 people responded in seconds. It became a point of pride. It demonstrated that Harlem protected its own, all of its own, not just the powerful or the criminal, but also the businesswomen, the shopkeepers, the neighbors. Mayme Johnson never spoke publicly about the incident beyond her police statement. But she continued operating her boutique for another 15 years, continued living in Harlem, continued building her life on her own terms. When asked years later by a friend why she'd stayed so calm during the attempt, Mayme reportedly said, "I've been living in Harlem long enough to know that you're never really alone on these streets. Someone's always watching. Someone's always willing to help." Those men didn't understand that. They thought they could just grab me and nobody would respond. They were wrong about that. Very wrong. Michael Dougherty was convicted of attempted kidnapping and conspiracy in August 1950. He received a sentence of 15 years in Sing Sing Correctional Facility after cooperating with prosecutors. He served 11 years, was released in 1961, and left New York permanently. Carl Henderson refused to cooperate, was convicted on both state and federal charges, and received 25 years. He died in prison in 1968. The driver, known as Dutch, was never identified or apprehended. He became one of those ghost figures in criminal history, probably real, but lost to documentation. Bumpy Johnson, true to his word to Lieutenant Maxwell, did not pursue street justice. Not because he'd forgiven the attempt, but because the legal consequences combined with the Klan's organizational collapse achieved his goals more effectively than violence would have. Mayme Johnson continued running Mayme's Fine Fashions until 1965, when she sold the business to one of her longtime employees and retired. She lived in Harlem until her death in 2009 at age 94, outliving her husband by 41 years. In her later years, she sometimes spoke to community groups and historians about life in mid-century Harlem. When discussing the 1950 kidnapping attempt, she always emphasized the same point. It wasn't Bumpy's organization that saved me that day. It was my neighbors, regular people making a split-second decision to help instead of looking away. That's the real story. And she was right. The attempted kidnapping of Mayme Johnson failed not because of criminal retaliation or gang intervention, but because an entire community responded instantly to protect one of their own. 20 people moved toward danger instead of away from it. They didn't know if the kidnappers had weapons. They didn't know if intervening would put them at risk. They just knew that Mrs. Johnson, the woman who ran the dress shop, who went to their church, who'd helped their families, was in trouble. And that was enough. The Klan members who planned the operation made a fundamental miscalculation. They saw Mayme as vulnerable because she was a woman, because she ran a small business, because they assumed she'd be isolated. They didn't understand that in Harlem, community bonds were stronger than fear, that mutual protection was a reflex, that threatening one person meant threatening everyone. 2 minutes. That's how long the entire kidnapping attempt lasted. 2 minutes from the moment the van, pulled up to the moment the kidnappers fled. 2 minutes that demonstrated more about real power, community power, collective power, the power of people willing to stand together, than any gang war or criminal operation ever could. The story became part of Harlem's oral history. Parents told their children, "You look out for your neighbors like those people looked out for Mrs. Johnson." Teachers used it as an example of civic responsibility. Community organizers referenced it when talking about collective action. And years later, during the civil rights movement, when activists trained volunteers in protecting each other during protests and demonstrations, they used similar principles: immediate response, collective presence, witnesses who document everything, the understanding that safety comes from solidarity. The failed kidnapping of Mayme Johnson in 1950 was a crime that lasted 2 minutes. But its lessons echoed for decades. It showed that protection doesn't always require violence. Sometimes it just requires people willing to step forward when others need help. 3 Klan members came to Lenox Avenue expecting an easy target. They found a community instead. They expected fear. They found courage. They expected success. They found failure, humiliation, and consequences they never anticipated. And Mayme Johnson, calm, composed, counting down from 3 while her neighbors rushed to help, became an enduring symbol of both personal dignity and community strength. That's the real story of the attempted kidnapping that failed in minutes. Not about criminal retaliation or gang justice, but about the instant when regular people chose action over fear, community over isolation, protection over indifference. 2 minutes that changed everything.